Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's class. We are already in week 8, so sure we can feel the progress, and everybody is beginning to write React like intermediate developers. Okay, so today we'll be moving forward with we'll continue from where we stopped last week. Last week we built what I would call poor man's Redux, using combining context plus use reducer. I believe all of you have been able to explore it on your own, like use it to implement some stuff in your own spare time. I know it was not included. I don't think it was included in the last task. So today we want to see how we can actually use Redux, which is a better version of what we did with context plus use reducer. So when do we start looking at, how do we scale from a poor man's Redux to actually using an external library like Redux to perform our global state management? I'll say we can look at those scenarios where you are trying to create a cart, maybe you are creating a shopping website, and you want to create a cart where people should be able to pick products, add products to cart, and all this kind of stuff, and do a checkout scenario, and probably even pay and like all that. Those are the kind of scenarios where or you want to manage user sessions globally, right? Those are the kind of scenarios where you think Redux, notifications, you want to handle high-level filters, you want to do async data calls professionally, you want to consider managing those async calls using Redux. Are we together? Now, basically, all I'm saying is when you get to these kind of scenarios, you are thinking you need a store that is built for scale. Okay. You want to have one predictable place for states. So you want to know that, okay, all my states is located in one particular location, meaning that Redux store is the single source of truth. Okay. Now, Redux also provides powerful dev tools, okay, that lets you time travel through every change. So one more thing that Redux provides is when we talk about optional subscription, right? So basically, when you talk about selective subscription, when you talk about selective subscription, now you are looking at a scenario where you don't want to render the whole application or all the subscribed elements when one state changes. Now, what Redux provides is that high level separation of concern. So if you have, say, a counter and you have a cart and you are using Redux, you should be able to update your carts without triggering any render for your count. Okay. We will see how all this comes together. So basically, the three principles we are looking at is number one, a single source of truth. All app state lives in one store object. Then the second one is state is read-only. So you cannot mutate the state inside the store. Okay, but you can use actions and you can dispatch actions that update state. Okay. Then the last is change via pure reducer. So remember we talked about reducers in our last class. We utilize reducers, which are pure functions. They are just one direction. So all our changes will happen through pure reducers. Are we together? Let's look at a little analogy here. So let's use this file. So let's say let me describe the direction that we are on. So we have UI. So first thing that happens is the UI dispatches an action. Okay. So UI dispatches an action. Now, when the UI dispatches the action, so we have something. The UI dispatches an action, it goes through, that action is triggered and goes through the reducer, which is a pure function, picks the action and produces the result. And that potentially changes, updates the state. Are we following? Compute immediately, this reducer computes new state. Okay. Now, after the reducer computes the state, we now have the store. Now, what the store does is the store now, the store now updates, the store updates, then we can now subscribe based on what I explained earlier. When I said subscribe to the component, when I talked about there's optional subscription, yeah, selective subscription. When I talked about selective subscription, so what happens here is after the store changes, it now does the subscription, it subscribes, it updates the subscribed component, and then renders the UI. Okay. Do we understand now? So this is the flow. This is how everything flows when working with Redux. As you can see, it's one direction. Let's carry on. Now, for us to be able to use Redux, we need to install Redux in our system. We need to install React Redux and Redux Toolkit. So this is, I'm going to paste the code, the command you need, and also paste it here for those who will be watching from YouTube. So we have npm install Redux.js / toolkit React Redux. So I'm not going to do this because I've already installed Redux in the system, in the app. So for those who are following, you can go ahead and do that installation. All right, let's move on. So now when we remember that for our classes, I tried to help us understand arranging our code base, right? Like structuring our code base for readability and maintainability. So for us to have a scalable code base that is working with Redux, we want to have an app layer. We want to have an app layer where we would keep our store. So we have a directory and call it app, and call it key feature or whatever is more readable for you. And then this is where we will keep our Redux store.js. Okay. Now that we have our store.js app file, the next thing we'll be thinking of is where do we keep our slices. Now we can create another directory and call that directory features. Within this directory, we want to have first, we want to take an example of counter. We want to have a counter. The counter slice, and then we can now create our counter slice. So one thing I wanted to understand is Redux, just the way we utilize context and use reducer, that is exactly how Redux functions, exactly how Redux works. But Redux provides its own um, use selector and use dispatch. Okay. So now we have our counter slice. Let's just create another directory. I'll call it cards. We'll come back to that directory later. Okay. So this feature is actually a convention. If you are working with other React developers, the expectation is they want to discover things like their slice and all that for Redux within the features directory. Okay. Are we together? Are we together, guys? All right. Now what we are going to do is create our first slice. Okay. So for us to be able to create a slice, we need to import create slice from Redux toolkit. Okay. So we have create slice imported from Redux toolkit. Then now we can create our slice. So for our slice, let's const counter slice equals to, now we bring in our create slice. Good. So now we have our slice created. We'll be writing all our content within this slice. So a slice basically bundles the states. Bundles the states, reduces and auto-generates actions for one feature. So as you can see now, this slice, you see that this slice is defined for counter. Okay. So you see that it is going to be bundling all the states for this very feature, to bundle the states, to bundle the reducers, and then auto-generate actions for this particular counter feature that we want to add to our application. Are we following? Now, the next thing we want to do is name this particular slice. And we want this slice to be called counter slice. Okay. The next step will be to define our initial state, which for this particular example, our initial state is going to be value 0. Okay. Are we following? Now, the next step we want to take is create our reducer. Okay. So basically, each key becomes an action creator and the code that handles it. Okay. So each key is an action creator combined with the code that handles it. So it's going to be key value pairs. But in this case now, it's not, the value is a function. Okay. So let's create our reducer. And for this reducer, we want to, first of all, add increment. Now there's something called IMER, IMMER. Okay, IMER. So what that does for us in Redux is it allows us to mutate states here, that is within this reducer. Okay, so we can change the state, we can change the initial state of this particular this particular feature within this reducer. Okay, so what happens is React toolkit here converts the state to an immutable update behind the scenes. So what happens is it's very safe inside the create slice. So let's go ahead and create our first function, our first action. So this action would increment. This action will increment, and we want to pass the state. Now we want to say state.value. So every time we click on this increment, we want to add one, we want to increment the value of the current state, which is 0 right now. We want to increase this value by 1. Now we can do the same thing for decrement and just reduce the value by 1, okay? Now we can also have a custom that increments by a particular amount. And for this one, we want to say increment by amount. And then let's say state action function. Good. So for this particular one, we want to state the value should increment the action.payload. So it should increment based on what we are adding as the payload here. Okay. So this particular increment by amount now is not just expecting a state now. It's not taking a state, it's taking a state and also taking an action. Remember, these ones were taking just the state, but now we are expected to actually trigger an action that should now send a payload within this action. A payload should be in this action. And then we should update this value based on what payload we pass. Okay? And then we have a reset that just brings everything to 0. Are we together? Good. Now, what create slice does, it auto-generates action creators, right? Matching each reducer that was created. So now we have 4 reducers now. We have increment, decrement, increment by amount, and reset, right? So what we want to do now is export all these reducers so that we can use them as actions. Now we can now write export const and with the structure and take increment, decrement, reset. And then we are taking it from this counter slice, this very counter slice. We are accessing it from the actions. Are we following? Are we good? Now that we have exported our actions, we can now export our slice. Now, what this export is used for is to now, is like, okay, we now have this inventory, or we now have this product or feature that we want to add to our store. Okay. Now, this export is what what provides this counter slice for us to add to our store. Okay. Are we good? Are we good, guys? No response. Any question? Okay, good. So in plain Redux, right? You would want to you need to handwrite action creators, action types, and a switch statement, right? Remember what we did last week. Now, these are like three separate things kept in sync, right? But what creates slice does, it generates all of them from one object. So the mutation only works because IMA never mutates states like this outside of create slice. So that IMA does not mutate the state outside of create slice. Are we together? Yes, a lot of bundling. That's why I'm taking my time. So if you don't understand, just tell me. I can always walk through it again. Because as you can see now, we have created the slides. We have our reducers. We have our initial states. We have our slice name. And then we have exported all our actions. And now we've exported our slides. Now, we will now go to our store. Now, for us to create our store, we need to import configure store from Redux toolkit. All right, then let's also import our counter slice. Let's see if that's accurate. Okay, yeah, that's accurate. Good. Now, the next step will be to create our store. So export const store, and that will be equals to the configure store we brought in, and then we can now define our reducers inside here. Now we have counter at the moment, right? So we define our counter reducer. Good. All right, so now as you can see, we have included our counter reducer now to our Redux store. So what we have done now is we have, inside the store, we have created a shelf where we want to save anything that has to do with counter. Okay, so all our counter resources will be saved inside the store. Now, for us to access this store, are we together? Do we understand what I've done here? Response, guys, so I can move. Are we there? Can anyone hear me? Still no response. Okay, so I would like us to be a little quicker with our responses so that I can flow, okay? So basically what this configure store does, it sets up, all right. So what this configure store does, it sets up the store, combines reducers, wires Redux dev tools, and adds sensible default middleware all in one call. Okay, so each key here, this counter key now, each key here is a slice of the global state tree. So now this particular store is the global state tree. each slice that we add here is a slice of that global state tree. Okay, so what we'll be doing here is we are going to be checking state. What we are doing is state.counter is equals to counter reducer, and then is equals to counter reducer. So basically, what's happening here is this state dot counter, this one is equals to this counter reducer, which we have defined down here, all this here. Okay, so with this store, if we provide this store to the whole of this application, anywhere in this app, we will be able to pick the function, the actions, and also access the states of this counter reducer. Now, first thing we want to do is provide the store to the entire application, okay? So that will be done. We'll do that inside just the way we did team provider and card provider. We will provide, we would bring provider. Now, provider is going to be gotten from React Redux this time. And then we will now pass our store to it, to the provider. So we are providing this store to the entire application. Okay. Okay. All right. So now we are providing this store to the entire application here. Okay. So you can see we passed the store. You can see that counter is already showing your store contains counter slice. Okay. And then the value is available. So now anything that any component or page that we try to access the counter slice, we will be able to visualize the content, that is the state, and we'll also be able to take the actions, like utilize the actions functions that we define in that slice. All right, so let's go ahead and explore. Okay, let's remove all this from home for now. Okay, let's take out this. This. Can there's okay, and take this out too. All right, so let's go ahead and utilize our store, the store that we've created and the slides that we have. Okay, let's create a counter component. So we seem to have a counter component here. Okay, so let's create, I already created a counter component here, so let's work with it. Okay, so first thing we want to do is import two things. Use selector and use dispatch from React Redux. Okay, and then we want to also get all our actions directly from our counter slice. Let's confirm that this is correct. Okay, that's correct. So let's also get increment by amount. Okay. Let's create our component export function counter. Now, what use selector does, it reads a slice of state. Okay. So what happens is this component that we are building now is going to only render when state.counter.value changes. Okay. So even if we have another slice called state, let's say that slice is a cart slice, right? For your shopping cart. If changes happen in that slice, it is not going to render this particular component we are creating. Okay. So what we do is we say const count. Now the count will be the current state. Okay. We'll access the state using use selector. And then we want to pick state. And then say state dot counter dot value. Okay. So there's an issue here. Okay. So now we've created our use selector, right? Now the next thing we want to, we've accessed our state rather. So if we copy this state and say console, so let's finish, then we can see what console looks like. We're not done yet. So let's also utilize our use dispatch. Let's call it dispatch and use dispatch, okay? So what use dispatch does is it gives you the dispatch function to send action. So it is this dispatch that we are going to be using to trigger all our actions. So all the actions that we created, these actions here, all these actions, we will utilize dispatch to dispatch all these actions where we need them, where necessary. Okay. Let's return. And then let's have each one. Let's have this. Then each one, let's count. Okay. So just to save time, we would do this. So now, if you notice, you can see that dispatch is being used to trigger our functions, right? All our actions. Okay, so now this particular dispatch is triggering the increment. Now, increment is not expecting any variable, right? So it's not expecting any argument. So we are expected to increment every time this button is clicked. Same thing for decrement, same thing for the reset. And then we also have one that increments based on what we input here. So we can actually have 8, 9, 80, and whatever number. And when this is triggered, it should add 80 to the current state. Now let's add a little styling. Let's give it a little styling so that it is presentable on the browser. So let's give all buttons unified PG of 600. Text white. Okay. Now let's give it a little padding. And then around those, 'Lx. 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 ' Because pointer. Okay, I think this should serve us. So this is what we do. Let's wrap these buttons in a div. Okay. So justify so that's fine. Okay. Then we can add the button. Okay. Are we good? Are we following? I hope nobody's confused so far. This one is just HTML, right? I don't need to do explanations for this. And we all know how to use on click and all that. So so now that we have this, we can go ahead and look at what this looks like on the browser. So let's add this feature to homepage. What's in it? And then let's visualize. Okay, are we together? So we can see our component here, right? Our component, we can see all our action buttons. And then we can see our counter state, which is 0 on initial render, okay? Based on what we have here. So we set our initial state to 0. So now what happens is when we trigger increment, you can see that it increments the value by 1. So this is for now. Let's start increment by 4 and you see that it increments by the value by 5. Now let's reduce it by 1. Okay, and then we can utilize reset to defaulting. So what we've just done now is we've created a global state using React Redux. And we've been able to create a slice, save that slice state to our store, provide the store to our application in main.jsx, and then we have accessed that store and utilized both the state of the particular feature and also dispatch all the actions that were created. Any question? Hello guys, any question? So not yet, okay. That's only Amara. Every other person is clear too. Sarah, do you have a question? Alan, do you have a question? Glory, AK, are you good? Ayomide, are we together? Okay, so Ayomide says we should take the summary again. That we should summarize what we've done again. Point out what we've done, like the flow. Is that it? Okay, Ezekiel, are you good? You also need assistance. What do you want me to recap on? So that I know this is kind of a little bit technical, so I want to be sure that we understand. Ezekiel, are you good? Yeah, I didn't see your response. Okay. All right. So let's take the flow again. So let's start from our slice, right? So first thing we did was to import create slice, and we utilized create slice to create a slice called counter slice, right? Then we initialized the state of the counter slice to value of 0, and then created some reducer actions, which includes increment, decrement, increment by amount, and reset. After creating these functions, reducer functions, we then exported these functions. We destructured the functions and exported them. We destructured these functions from our slice. Okay, so we're taking the actions, which the actions are reset action, increment by amount action, decrement action, and increment action. Then we also exported the whole slice. Now we came to our store and then created our store using configure store, which created this store and exported the store. Then we now define all our slices, which are all our reducers, counter reducers. Then we define our counter reducer here. Now, this counter reducer, we now provided this counter reducer by providing the store to our application in main. We imported provider from React Redux, and then we brought in our store and passed, because this provider is expecting a store. So what we did here now is point the provider to the store that we want to provide to this application. Then came the fun part where we went to our counter component and then assessed the current state of our counter slice using use selector. So we use use selector to select this, to pick out the state, to single out the state. Okay. Now, what was the state that we're looking for? The value, the counter value, which is the initial value that we created, this value that we created here. This value is what we are trying to access. Now, remember that inside increment, we are updating that value. We decrement, we are updating that value. For every action that we take, it is that value that we are updating. Okay? So when we come into our component here and access that value, whatever is this value, anytime this value updates, anytime any action is taken that updates this value, anytime any of these actions are taken that does what we have defined here, it updates the state and this count changes. Okay? Now dispatch came into the picture. Dispatch is now what we are using to trigger our actions. Okay? So for every action, we must wrap it with a dispatch. So this dispatch action now triggers counter/increment. So it is assessing the counter slice and picking up the increment action and triggering that increment action. Now we've already defined what the increment action should do inside our slice. So all the action is happening within this slice, inside this slice, which is where IMA comes in, right? IMA is handling everything that has to do with mutating our state within the counter slice. Now, when each of these actions happen, it updates this initial state, it updates this value to, for this, it updates it to 1, this reduces it by 1, this increments by any value that we define, right? And this resets this value to 0. So all we did now in counter is trigger these dispatch actions with an on-click event. So we say when this particular button is clicked, it should dispatch increment function. Likewise, this should dispatch decrement, and this should reset, And this on click, every time this button is clicked, it should increment by this value. It should increment by 5. So we can decide to increment by 60 or whatever. Let's say 80. Let's say 80. Well, we can increment by 8, even 8 million. 880. And then we now saw it in action. So you see that the counter is 0. If we trigger this dispatch, you see that it has increased from 0 to 880. If we add a decrement, it reduces it by 1. If we increment, it adds 1. If we reset, it returns it back to the initial 0. I believe that should be clear now. Are we good now, everyone? Please respond so we can move. All right, so we're good. Okay. So, like I said, use selector is a subscription with a selector, right? So you're subscribing to a particular selector. You are like selecting from something. Okay. It's like you do DSTV subscription, right? And the money you pay for provides you with only 3 screens to view, 3 channels to view. That subscription, there's no way you can open another channel and automatically or magically that channel is going to show, right? It's the same thing with Redux. When we subscribe to a particular selector that is picked from a particular slice, a particular feature, the updates only occur in that particular feature because it is only listening to the exact slice that you return. So any state that is not related will not re-render. Okay? Any state that is not related to this particular component will not re-render this component. Are we good, guys? Okay, so let's create another slice. Let's create a cat slice. Yeah, you're welcome, Archie. Let's create a cat slice. I call cat slice.js. Okay. And then we will go through the same process, import, get slice from that toolkit, first, that slice. Then we'll name that cat. And the initial state will be an empty object. Then we can now create add item, we can now start creating our actions. And for add item, we want to expect state, we want to change state and action. Okay. Now for this, we want to say const existing item. So hold on, let me put this in view. Okay. So we want to say const existing item. We want to now check the state of the items and then want to find the item by ID. Okay. So if the item.id is equals to the action.payload, that is equals to the action, to the item that we want to pass, that the item that we want to create, then we should not create a new item. We should rather increment the number of items that we've added, number of times we've added that particular item. So we will now utilize this existing item to check if existing item, we want to increment the quantity only. Okay? Are we following that? So let's do something like, let's not pass it through payload. Let's just increment it by 1. Okay, simplistic. Okay, so now existing item dot quantity dot, dot quantity. We'll just increment the quantity by 1. Okay. Then if the item does not exist, we can now push, that is add that item. So now we push now, we are now creating a new item. Okay, so we'll update this payload, and then want to quantity. Quantity equals to 1. Yeah, all right, that should be good. Okay, that's good. Let's carry on. So now we have our first reducer created, right? We want to create our next. So we all understand what we've done here. What we've done here is an intermediate way of thinking, right? Because if you want to create a cart, there's a chance that some people might want to buy one item. Might want to buy like maybe 4 or 5 of one item. So they want to have like one item by 5, right? So they want to increase the quantity. So we want to give them the provision so that it's easy for them to increase the quantity without having to see that item appear over and over and over and over again. Okay. Now we can also create our remove item. And for remove item, it's pretty much straightforward. Just say we want to set state.item. We want to set the state.item, find the particular item ID we want to remove. And then when we find that item ID, we check if it matches the payload that we are sending, and then we want to filter it out of the items array. Okay. And that sums up that. Then we should have a clear cut. Okay, and then for clear cut, we just want to return the array, the items array to an empty state. Is this clear? Are we together? All right. Now we can go ahead and do our exports, okay, for our store. So now we have our add item for action, remove item action, and clear cut action from our cat slice, okay, as you can see. Then we also export our cat slice. So if we come to our store, what we need to do is import our cat slice, and then we can pass it to add it, include it in our reducer. Okay. Okay. So now what's happening here is we now have state dot counter dot carts rather is now equals to cart reducer. Okay. So now what happens is we can now access this. We don't need to go back to our main because we have already provided the store. So adding our cart reducer cart or cart slice only updates, increases the number of slices that we have provided in our store. Okay. we can now create our cart summary. Let's utilize this cart summary page to update our code. So we'll be using context in this scenario. And we can take out just this. Okay. Any question, guys? Any question? Any question? Okay, all right. Okay. So let's go ahead and work. So we import our use dispatch and use selector from React Redux. And then we import our actions from our carts. We do that. Okay, it's accurate. Now we can go ahead and define our dispatch and pick our items. And remember, we are taking the state, so we are taking our items using use selector to pick the state of our items from the slice, right? From our cart slice. Let's define a product payload. Product payload, yeah, it should include ID, name, and price. Okay. Then the next thing we'll do is to define const one handle add item. So for this, we want to do ID. So we want to do ID equals to products, blah, blah. So we'll pick products, not product here. Okay, we can have it this way. All right, then we can now const total. So we're checking the total quantity of products, not total price. And total, we want to check item dot reduce sum of item equals to sum plus item, the price times item dot quantity. Okay. So now that we have our handle add item and then we have our total, we can now write some HTML. Okay. So let's say we have cart summary. For cart summary, we want to add, this is the product we want to add. Page 3, we want to add products, name. Then we also want to visualize the price of the product. Okay. Then we want to add our button to handle add. We have button on click equals Handle add item. Okay. So handle add item. Okay. So now that we have add item, we can check, we can display the number of items as the length of the items. So we can say items dot length. Okay. Items and the price. All right, are we good? Are we good, guys? All right. So now that we have that, we can also list our items, right? So we map through our items and then we can list it. And within our list, we can add a button to dispatch our remove item. Okay. All right, now that we have our remove item and we are displaying our content, we can now add a button to clear cart. So I think we already have this in our home components, so we can just, yep. All right, so let us visualize and see what we have. And so we have summary, blah, blah, blah. So what I'm going to do now is come to counter and take the button style that we have here and apply this button style to the buttons we have inside, just so we can have some, like, can visualize things better. Okay, so we have add to cart, we have clear cards. Those are just two buttons. Can see remove. Okay, so remove is going to display only when items exist, right? So let's go ahead and add product one to cart. Okay. Now we've added product one to cart, and you can see the content is product one, quantity is one, and then the price is stated there, right? Now, if we add product one again, remember product one is going to be the same ID. What happens now is the quantity increases, right? Now the quantity increases and the price also updates. So the price is updating here where you have the total price for all the like all the products that you've added. Now we can remove the whole of this product from the cart. So we can also add it and we can also clear the cart. Now we cannot visualize what it looks like to add another cart now because we are using custom data here. We have the custom data that we are using, payload. Okay. So when you are testing this feature out, you can actually utilize if like form input fields, use form input fields to input, to create, to control adding to cart. So your form should have an input field for product, a product name and product price. And then you should be able to, you can use data now to give it unique IDs, right? And then when you add to cart, when you display all the products, when you add to cart rather, because it's unique ID, it can populate. Now you can now add a button to your products. You can add remove or you can add increase quantity here. So that increase quantity button can be utilized to update only the quantity. Are we good, guys? So in that case now you also need to update your slice, right? Because you want to extract that aspect of increasing quantity from the add to cart. So you are now adding to cart, and then you have a different function, a different action that increases the quantity of your cart, of your particular product. So yeah, are we good? Do we understand? Now, while all these actions in this cart summary is being triggered and working, you can see that it doesn't affect our counter state in any way. Same thing with if we start updating our counter state, it doesn't change anything in our cart summary. So this is very scalable. Okay, so we can go ahead and utilize the content of this particular cart, like this particular cart store. You can, if you have 500 pages in your application and you want to manipulate this cart and dispatch actions to update this particular cart slicer, you can actually access it from all the 50 components and you will get the same results because there is just one source of truth. Everything is being stored to one place. Does that make sense, everyone? Does that make sense? It's making sense to only Amachi, or it makes sense to everybody. Vladimir, welcome to class. You came in late. Okay, so let's go ahead. So what are the scenarios you look at when picking? What are the differences, right? So if you have a tax, you have tax, the difference between Redux toolkit versus plain Redux, right? For Redux toolkit, action type, you handwrite your action, your string constants, right? But for Redux toolkit, it auto generates using the create slice. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I also encourage that. All right. Then for action creators, you also write action creators manually, but Redux Toolkit automates that process for you. Yeah. Yeah. Then we now have for reducers, we utilize switch statements, do spread everywhere, and also, but for Redux Toolkit, we utilize create slice plus ima, and that helps us to handle all the mutations that we need to do. Okay, then store setup, we create store by ourselves, and then we combine it with combine reducers. Okay, and then for Redux, we have we configure store, and it's just one call and it handles everything. Okay, so immutability for plain, you manually mutate using spread, while for Redux, ima does that for you already. It handles the mutation. So it creates that new reference when updating the object. The new reference that we use spread to do. ima creates that new reference using within the create slice block. Okay. Yeah, I think that will be all for today. We'll wrap up there. And then when next we come, we'll see how we can handle async calls, async logic, and selectors with Redux. I hope today's class was beneficial to everybody, and I hope we all were able to understand to a very high level how to utilize Redux. And you can already picture how different Redux, like the gains that Redux brings to the picture, as opposed to combining context and use reducers. Thank you all for joining today's class, and I look forward to seeing you guys in our next class. Bye, everyone.